Crystal Tellier, and what I'm planning on doing today in this video is reviewing through a test panel from Vibrant Wellness, the Oxidative Stress Profile. My intention is to introduce this test and discuss reasons why we would order this test on a patient, and also show you some of the clinical functions that we have done in our practice that have allowed us to see positive changes for this patient. What you can see here is one of the first pages that highlights some of the genetic testing that was done. This is a female, 44-year-old, who had some concerns about some recent skin cancer changes and wanted to look at what is going on in her body and its ability to repair itself. We will run this panel in cases of cancer, but we also will run this panel if there are significant concerns around cardiovascular disease, diabetes, or any other metabolic dysfunction within the body, or for the health conscious patient that is really looking at minimizing the aging process. When we have high oxidative stress or load, that means that there is a defect in our body's ability to cellularly repair. Or it also could mean that there is a high burden of triggers that can be causing free radical damage. And free radical damage can be anything from UV damage from our sun rays. It may come in the form of contaminants in our food or water. And sometimes the free radical damage is internal within us if we do not have certain functions within our body that are optimized. That could be from nutrient deficiencies. It can be related to genetic SNPs or mutations in our genetic information, and a variety of other reasons. On this page here, when you're seeing the boxes that are in red, those are highlighting some of the genetic SNPs for this patient that are part of this patient's history. And when we do genetic testing, we must understand that that data never changes. That is the information that is shared with us from our mom and dad at conception. And so this is this patient's story. But what we can change is how we nurture this patient. So while nature stays the same, the genetics will stay the same, and so her certain risk factors from a genetic standpoint will stay the same. We can nurture the body of this patient and create substantial change in her overall health and wellness. The purpose of this video today is not to get into the details around genetics, because genetics is a whole topic in itself and is very detailed. I want to just show some of the key highlights of this testing panel, and on the initial panel I will often include the genetics if the patient feels that it's in their best interest. So this page here talks about where the genetics fall within how our body does support free radical damage repairing. And you can see again in those red areas, which will highlight with the specific genes as they're labeled down here. Also part of the genetic, and this is an antioxidant genetics, you can see the specific test name, what the gene name is, and the general risk that's associated with it. When you see the red box, you will see that this is a double gene mutation, and so the risk factor tends to be higher, versus in these yellow boxes, generally there's one SNP that is mutated and one that is normal. This panel also highlights 4 key areas: protein oxidation, DNA damage, RNA damage, and lipid peroxidation. For this patient, there were several markers that are highlighted here in red, and this would be a pretty significant load of oxidative damage, which is likely contributing to why this patient had some concerns with the basal cell carcinoma. Now, basal cell carcinoma also, there's a lifetime risk when you're talking about sun exposure, and that patient did have a long time growing up within the sunny Arizona, lots of outdoor sports, and so the collective damage has been done through decades. However, seeing that we have these different metabolites that are highlighted in these red boxes, which we determined from a urinary sample, does show that there's high levels of these proteins that are correlated with these types of damage. Why we care about that is we need to have cellular repair. And if we don't repair ourselves, then ultimately that is what cancer can look like. That's what heart disease can look like. That's what Alzheimer's can look like. Or really any dysfunctional disease pattern is when there is some sort of damage to that natural mechanism and therefore a lesser functional purpose associated with whatever gene or protein, etc., that is identified by that material. Protein oxidation, we think of that in its simplest form, is proteins are signaling molecules that tell our body certain functions that it needs to do and when it needs to do it. And so if we are oxidizing or breaking down proteins, we will be less efficient at doing the cellular tasks that we are expected to do. DNA and RNA, both of those are signaling peptides that the body uses as coding material to ultimately create the proteins and a variety of other substances in there. We think of that in the simplest form as when we create a baby, we have DNA that comes together that codes, all right, this is a male, this is a female, this is where all the body parts go, this is how the heart pumps, etc. And I'm oversimplifying that. or RNA is in every single cell that we have in our body. And when that is damaged, we run the risk of having that cell not function the way that it needs to. Lipid peroxidation, this is linked with diseases like atherosclerosis, certainly is linked with overall inflammation within the body, can trigger inflammation in our neurological system, and is an overall sign of lipids or fats within the body that are no longer in their wholest or truest of forms and therefore not able to function the way that they should. You'll see some of the oxidative stress markers that are listed with the collective reference ranges that are here. And then the other thing that is pretty neat about this test is they give an oxidative damage score. And what they do is the higher that damage score is and look at the decade of life that you are, they give you an idea around how fast is your aging process. The more oxidative damage you have, the more accelerated your aging is. And ideally, you want to be as close to your given age as possible. So this female is 44 years old, and where her initial oxidative stress was at 62 years old. So almost 2 decades older than what she is. And doesn't really fit with what her diet and lifestyle and overall sense of wellness is, except it was a modifiable component that we needed to really support and fix. And I am happy to report we'll see here in future tests that we were able to make major corrections. This is still part of the antioxidant genetics. You can see these are different genetics for glutathione, selenol proteins, antioxidant activity, reactive oxygen species production, etc. If there's a box here that's listed without a red or yellow, that means that both of the genetics or SNPs were in their normal alleles. This is a summary of all of the oxidative stress markers that were measured, not just the ones that were triggering high. Now what we're coming down into is a repeat test that was collected about 6 months after the initial panel. What we did for this patient is we put her on a high-dose vitamin C with other immune supportive cofactors like selenium, zinc, B vitamins. And then we did that about once a month along with a glutathione push. She did have some significant genetic SNPs along the glutathione pathway. And then the other thing that we incorporated was weekly NAD intramuscular injections. Right off the bat, you can see she went from several markers in each of these categories to now only 3 markers out of range. The RNA damage marker completely cleared. Let me go ahead and scroll all the way back up to the top here. Sorry for the dizziness. Let me give you a reminder of where she was. Look at this. 5 in that protein oxidation, 3 in the DNA, 1 RNA, and 3 in the lipid peroxidation. So circling back over to here, we can see that was a substantial improvement in her overall health and wellness. And she does report improved energy, less brain fog, and overall feeling more energetic in her day-to-day. Her oxidative damage marker, her aging score, went down. She's now in this moderate accelerated aging process and closer to about a decade older than her given biological age. What we find is about that decade mark is pretty typical for what we see in our patient population. Unfortunately, the world that we live in, there are high numbers of reasons that we have such oxidative damage. We have, in the metropolitan area, we have an international airport, tons of traffic and car fumes. We have a water supply that's perhaps not the cleanest water, and that goes down even into our food supply chain, and just busy American lives. And so this is pretty common to see about a decade. This patient is committed to continue another 6 months of IVs and NAD injections, and we will see where her stress age comes down at that mark. When you repeat this test, notice we did not repeat genetics because, again, genetics do not change. You're born with that. So the repeat panel is a smaller panel, and it only does these oxidative stress biomarkers. And what you can see is the column of previous markers to now current markers. Several of them went from this moderate range into the normal range, or went from the red zone, which is high, into now a moderate range or borderline range. You can see all the different categories here. So we had substantial improvements with many of them. And that is the end of that. I sure hope that this was helpful for you. Again, the purpose of this test is to support overall health, minimize aging, reduce some of the major disease risk factors for cancer and cardiovascular disease, metabolic dysfunction, whether it's diabetes or even something like dementia or Alzheimer's. If you're interested in this material, we will continue to make some more recordings, but I also encourage you to give our office a call, and we can support ordering this test for yourself or your loved one.